Thanks very much, Pip, and thanks everyone for coming out today in a little patch of Sydney sun to talk about AUKUS and peace. I too want to acknowledge this is First Nations and Gadigal land that we're gathered on. And as we heard earlier, wherever nuclear weapons are exploded, normally where the resources are extracted to make weapons, the theft and the violence happens so often on First Nations land. So let's make part of our commitment to peace, committing in this country to self-determination, to land, treaty and justice for First Nations peoples, and let's make it real. Where do you start? I mean, the problem I find standing up and talking about why we should get out of AUKUS and not go to war with China is, it is like you could speak about this for 4.5 hours. I've been known to do that kind of thing, and you still wouldn't have finished with the menu, would you? But why don't we start with what AUKUS is actually doing to Australia at the moment? We've heard some of it touched upon by earlier speakers, and I really want to commend them all for the contributions they've made. But about a month ago, Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, and in Canberra you can't call him Defence Minister, he gets really angry. You have to call him Deputy Prime Minister, it's a status thing. So I'll call him the Deputy Prime Minister, Richard Marles. Actually let the cat out of the bag in a News Corp warfest that was funded by News Corp and weapons manufacturers. He went down, I think he got a bit carried away with the audience, you could see the future jobs in the audience. And he was asked about, well, if there was a US war with China, what would Australia do? And he said, in this accidental truth bomb, well, of course we'd be involved. Of course we'd be involved. Well, they've got so many bases here. They've got so much of a footprint here in Australia. That's what we're doing. We're providing. And I don't know if he had a moment of recollection at that point. I don't know if his advisors stopped him. But he let the cat out of the bag. And think about it. Think about what Labor and the Coalition have done over the last, particularly the last decade and a half, but it goes back to that. We've got Pine Gap sitting in the middle of the country, notionally a joint facility, but if any Australian politician tried to go there who wasn't already wearing a warmonger hat from Labor or the Coalition, you're denied entry. We don't know what happens there, but we're told it's with full concurrence and knowledge. Likely Pine Gap was used in the illegal attack on Iran, most recently by the US military. But it's one of the key facilities the US uses to gather intelligence around the world, disseminate it, and then direct it out through their military and security agencies right in the middle of Australia. We have the Harold Holt facility in northwest Australia, which is the US's primary facility for communicating with its submarine fleet. If they ever press the button for a doomsday attack on the planet to destroy the planet, it's going to come out of northwest Australia. From the Harold Holt facility, and they're about to double that and produce also a deep space facility there. We have US Marines pre-positioned in Darwin, 2,500 US Marines pre-positioned in Darwin, ready to prevent Canberra getting out of hand. To deliver security in the region. We have RAAF Tyndall, which is a big RAAF base just about 150 k's south of Darwin, which has been expanded now, as Jem said, to have nuclear-capable B-52 bombers in it. And when you ask the likes of Penny Wong or Richard Marles, well, do they carry nuclear weapons? They say, how dare you politicise this? How dare you? We don't ask, we don't tell. So, nuclear-capable B-52s in Tyndall, Marines in Darwin, Pine Gap, Harold Holt, and get this, the kicker is at the moment, under AUKUS, Australia is in the middle of spending $1.7 billion of our money to build the US a nuclear attack submarine base just off Fremantle, which is going to be up and running by 2027, to pre-position 5 US nuclear submarines so that they can go up on a shorter trip to engage in a war with China, particularly around the Malacca Straits, and shut down some of the trade routes there. Paid for by Australia, up and running by 2027, which on anyone's time frame, we won't have nuclear submarines for. We're literally building the US their next base. And as Jem has pointed out too, that we know that they also want a nuclear submarine base in Port Kembla. So when the Prime Minister says, we've, in the proud tradition of John Curtin, we have an independent Australian policy, we're going to be taking independent steps, that's not what Washington sees. Washington sees us as a base, not as a partner, but as a patsy and a base. And we have two political parties that are letting them build it here and expand it under AUKUS. It's incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous. But I can tell you this, the Australian public is finally, I think, waking up and seeing more broadly exactly what a dependency relationship, what a deputy sheriff means, and how dangerous it is for Australia and Australia's future. And AUKUS has been, I think the likes of Scott Morrison and Richard Marles and those who thought AUKUS was this major genius stroke to finally embed Australia in permanently into the US military. It may be the moment where the Australian public wakes up and sees what a danger it is. And you see the polls. And the AUKUS is about as popular as a fart in an elevator when you get out and talk to the public. It's incredibly popular in Canberra because they see jobs and careers and joining up with the legacy media in a manufactured fear-mongering campaign against China. But out in the public, we're finally getting sick of it. And I do think the idea that we would be signing ourselves on to what a 50-year alliance today with the United Kingdom in our region. I mean, the United Kingdom is having trouble keeping its own defence force running in the United Kingdom. The idea that they're going to be a significant security partner for us in a war with China is actually farcical. And you heard Alison talk about the problems they're having just getting their own nuclear industry running. Far from the UK coming to save us, the purpose of AUKUS is for us to give them $5 billion to get them out of the problems they have making nuclear submarines themselves. Like, we are just a cash cow for the UK. And in terms of being used in a conflict, a hot conflict, they're about as useful as a pair of left-handed scissors. And I say that as a khaki hander. Obviously, that's designed for us to subsidise the UK. And the Labor government has already agreed to give about $5 billion to subsidise Rolls-Royce to make to try and get out of the mess that they have for their nuclear reactor campaign. They don't trumpet that much. We've given $1.6 billion already to the US for their nuclear industry, submarine industry base, and they've given that all this year. And just for a moment of reflection, right? We have an environmental catastrophe in South Australia. An algal bloom that's destroying jobs, killing the environment. And yet the Albanese government has found itself able to give 100 times more money to the US this year for nuclear submarines than they've been able to give to South Australia to deal with a genuine environmental crisis. They're the kinds of decisions AUKUS are forcing on us. And they're toxic as an algal bloom. But I want to point out this. War with China is not inevitable. We should fight against the manufactured idea that there's an invasion coming from China and that we would be in any way safer, even if there was, through the alliance with AUKUS, because indeed, all that AUKUS does is actually make war more likely. The idea that you arm for peace and you build $375 billion of weapons for peace is an obscenity, and we should push against it. The idea that there is some inevitable war conflict with China is an obscenity, and we should push against it, and we should reject it when we see it from our politicians and from our major media. And indeed, if you think about if there is a risk to us from a conflict with China, it only comes about because of AUKUS and because we are building a nuclear submarine attack base aimed at China off Fremantle. It comes about because we have Pine Gap and we have the Northwest Cape. And we have Marines pre-positioned in Darwin, and we have nuclear-capable B-52 bombers that are designed to be used in a war with China on our soil. So if we want to make Australia safe, let's knock off AUKUS and remove US bases from this country so that we're not a target and we're not a part of it. There is much more to speak about this. You know, why we will not get the submarines. And we've heard different speakers touch upon it. But the US does not have the industrial capacity to make any spare nuclear submarines for us. And that's what AUKUS is dependent upon, us getting a couple of spare second-hand nuclear submarines from the US in the early 2030s. They'll be painted and renovated, don't worry, but second-hand Virginia-class submarines in the early 2030s. That will not happen. That will not happen. But I believe the Trump regime wants to keep AUKUS on life support, perhaps squeeze us for a few extra billion here and there, until they've got their nuclear submarine base built by Australian taxpayers off Fremantle. So they'll probably want to keep it on life support until 2027. get their nuclear submarine base, pre-position their nuclear submarines, expand their footprint on this country, and then walk back the Pillar 1 part. But we need to make sure we are educating the public about what this means. And you heard from the polls, the more the Australian public finds out about this, the more offended they are. Australians do not want to go to war with China. We do not. We want to find a pathway out of this horror show with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is almost Exhibit A for why you don't want to tie yourself to the US and the US military. So we will be pressing, as always, for greater transparency in Canberra. We will be pressing for a parliamentary inquiry into AUKUS. And we think that's critical, not because it's likely to have a majority that says we should get out of AUKUS. It'll be a majority from the war parties, from Labor and the Coalition. But imagine the opportunity of travelling around the country and receiving submissions and going to Adelaide and joining up with the peace campaigners in Adelaide, hearing from academics and strategic thinkers about the dangers of AUKUS, travelling to Port Kembla and Perth and helping to galvanise the country against AUKUS. We will win this. AUKUS will fall over as a result of its own internal contradictions. We need that to happen, though, as a matter of urgency, because every minute it's on the table. Every year it builds. We get closer to this disastrous war with China, which the Australian public rejects, and we need the Parliament to reject too. Thanks very much.